I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Thursday, June the 20th, where 10,000 head of yearling feeder cattle at OKC West in El Reno, Oklahoma. That is a huge offering to anybody's standards, and just amazing to get that many, and most of them load lots or big strings of cattle going through a brick and mortar sale barn, putting them in front of buyers, and it's just great to see that. I'll give you a whole bunch of quotes out of there in just a little bit, but let's talk about the board on Wednesday. June live cattle futures down 95 cents, 108.50. August down a buck at 104.55. August feeder cattle down 72 cents at 136.52, and September down 60 at 137. Noticeably, we saw more support for out fronts, fairly out front on your feeder cattle, but long out front in your live cattle, and it's making a lot of us wonder that maybe the cattle aren't out there as we get down the road a ways there. We know that we lost a lot of calves in the storms this past winter, especially in the northern plains and in the Midwest with the horrible winter they had, and then the floods on top of it. But if you talk to folks up there, actually there's probably been more of those same calves, just a little bit older, a little heavier, dying or becoming chronics because of all that stress and all that suffering that they did soon after they were born. There were a lot of sick cattle up there. A lot of those cattle will end up being non-doers. They just won't make it, not going to enter the food chain at some point, and there's a lot of those cattle out there, and so we're starting to think that maybe there's not going to be as many calves down the road, and long down the road next year, not as many fat cattle because of the loss during the floods and just a horrible winter and that much stress and undue pressure on those calves and the cows too, guys, and a lot of bred cows were lost in that, and these supplies have to show up. The light numbers, the death loss, the weight loss, everything has to show up at some point. Your fat cattle trade has not really developed yet. It's kind of an unusual trade that we're seeing here middle of the week. Iowa, which has now become the one that sets the market everywhere. They've been trading at a premium. We've got some of these smaller regional premium packers that are going in there looking for top quality kind of cattle because they've got them there. Those farmer feeders, they do a lot of confinement feeding there. Those cattle are clean. They're high choice and prime for the most part, and those guys are getting paid for those. Now your other four areas are kind of lagging behind, but Iowa's out there setting the pace, and good for them. 4,200 head confirmed in Iowa on Wednesday, and mostly dressed at 180, a few as high as 184, a little range there, but mostly 180 dressed, and a few live sales for immediate delivery, near-term delivery from 112 to 115. Nobody else can get that. Nebraska has yet to trade a hoof. Kansas has not traded a hoof. Colorado may have traded some cattle, but through mandatory price reporting, confidentiality rules prohibit us from seeing what those trades are. There's not enough players in the game, and they'll let the cat out of the bag for one buyer or one seller if they do that, because there's just not enough play in the market. A whopping 3 truckloads of cattle, fat cattle, have sold in Texas at $110, but we suspect that is probably the market. We know that there's some cattle has been traded in the northern plains at 110 post 4th of July. So those aren't showing up right away. But it just makes you wonder where this trade is going. You wonder, how are all these cattle being traded if we're not getting any kind of trade showing up anywhere? Well, they're all being formulated. The contracts are getting more popular as time goes by too, but they're all formula traded. Now what does that mean? Well, there's a base price that's set largely by what the weighted averages are on the trade, the little minuscule trade that we see out there, and then there's some pluses and minuses off of those, but it's all a formula deal. And most all of these corporate feedlots, that's the way they sell. The ones that are tied in with the plants, like your Five Rivers, for your Freona Industries, for the most part, your Green Plains for the most part, your cactuses for the most part, are all formula traded. They don't have to haggle on those prices. That's why we have no leverage in your fat cattle arena, because they just they know what they've got when they've got them ready. They turn in their numbers. The packers know what their captive supplies are. They have their needs filled right there, and it's all based on that little minuscule trade that actually happens. Now, a lot of the industry would like to see more leverage in there. But, most of those big outfits that I named, they don't have any choice. They're already in an arrangement with the packer. They can't come back and offer those cattle up for sale unless something major changes. Your mandatory price reporting, which is going on 20 years now, that was supposed to change things, because 20 years ago I was working for USDA. We were calling feedlots and they were just telling us how many pens or how many loads or how many hundreds that they sold, and it seemed like they were always at the same price. And the industry kind of wondered, is that really the way it is? Is there not any more difference than that? Let's have something that's a little more transparent. Let's try to get some more leverage at that time. So they called upon the government, and it's actually a law in there, mandatory price reporting, that all your packing plants, if they kill so many heads, so all your major packing plants, they have to turn in all their buy information, all their price information twice a day since they turned it in the last time. So basically everything that they do, they have to turn in. And that's where your weighted averages comes from. Well, confidentiality comes into play. Like in Colorado, there's not as many players, and so they're not going to tip any one company's hands, whether it be a packer or a feeder. And so they've got to have enough players in there to water it down to show what's going on. But it's finally got to the point where mandatory price reporting is basically just enabling the concentration of formula pricing, and we don't see hardly anybody trade on the open market, on the negotiated market anymore. Some of the big outfits that trade negotiated, when times get hard and it looks like we're in a down market, they might sell all their cattle for the next 3 months. Then you're left with hardly any cattle left. And we're at the point now where we're about 20% of the cattle are actually negotiated upon, and 80% are priced off what those 20% bring. And it makes you wonder, how could we shake things up a little bit? Well, mandatory price reporting is up for reauthorization right now. They're going to have a comment period, and then they'll vote on it and see if it's what we want to keep doing. What if we didn't have mandatory price reporting? What if we didn't have that information? What if the packers didn't have that weighted average for the 5 area, or for the southern plains or the northern plains, or a particular region to price all those formula cattle off of? Maybe it would cause some of these outfits to come to their milk and say, where are you getting that price, and where's that price coming from? I'm not crazy about that price. I think I'd like to have a little bit of say in what my cattle are bringing. I've got a lot of cattle here. Why don't you bid me on the cattle, and I'll tell you whether or not I'll take it or not. And then I'll tell you where I'm at. And then we'll go back and forth, and we'll arrive at a price that we both are happy with, rather than you just dictating to me what I'm going to get for my cattle. And it's just a thought there, but it's something we might ought to think about, guys. But so we haven't really established our market, but we pretty much know, even though we haven't sold very many cattle at all in the southern plains, that we're working with a 110 market. If it gets any better than that, it's a gift. If it gets any worse than that, we really suffered a loss this week, but it's still going to be lower than the weighted averages from last week. But box beef cutout values bounced back some here in the middle of the week. They're still just a pinch lower than what your average for the week was last week, but they bounced back some from early week trading. Let's look at your feeder cattle market, your real-time index on Cattle Market Central, based on the 800-pound steer, setting at 131.76. That is down $1.42, and you think, oh, that's terrible. Actually, your yearling feeder market is about steady, but whenever you've got 10,000 head of cattle in El Reno, Oklahoma, and you don't have any Phillips, South Dakotas, or Valentine, Nebraskas, or big Russell, Iowas, or anything like that this week to offset that, then it's going to take it down some, because like it or not, guys, your cattle in the southern plains don't bring as much as they do in the northern plains, because they're not worth as much as those in the northern plains. I spent enough time up there in the Midwest and northern plains. Even though I was raised in the Southwest, I got to thinking that all cattle were black, 85% black and square made and good and all that. But now that I've been back a few years, I'm into the real world, and then I see spots and horns and lumps and bumps and humps and all different kinds of cattle, which I think it's great that we have individual producers raising all different kinds of cattle. But the cattle in the southern plains aren't worth as much as the cattle in the northern plains, and a lot of times they can't go north. Now this time of year, your southern plains cattle can go north, and we're seeing some of those northern plains guys buying some cattle. If they don't have a lot of hair, that's fine. They're not going to need it between now and when they finish. And if they're not perfect, that's fine anyway, because the lion's share of the cattle great choice are better anyway. And I think we've got to look at that, because this instrument grading on these carcasses is making way too many cattle great choice. It's not hurting the producer. The packers are loving it, but the consumers don't really know what they're getting. But in the long run, it's going to hurt the beef business if we keep passing off all these carcasses as choice or better. But 131.76 on an 800-pound steer. But actually your weights went up because we had so many heavy cattle. That goes from 700 to 899. But so many 8-weight cattle in there, your averages were up 5 pounds for the day at 805 instead of averaging right at 800 pounds. But a lot of good big heavy cattle in El Reno at OKC West. They call the market on feeder steers steady and feeder heifers $1 to $2 lower. You look at this Cattle Market Central market report that has all the cattle in there, not picking and choosing, not flagging, not grading the cattle, all the cattle, because all the cattle are going to be going on feed and finished out, because what else you're going to do with them. It could be some heifers kept back, but not many. But look at your steers there. Notice no calves, because those sold on Tuesday and not enough for a good market test. But you notice on the well-tested weights, there was 1,602 head of 7-weight steers in El Reno. They averaged 759. Notice on the heavy side at 133.01. 2,833 head of 8-weight steers through the ring at El Reno, Oklahoma. Averaged 854 on the heavy side again at 127.25 on the weighted average price. You notice the changes from the weighted average from the previous week. It's down $1 or $2, but the sheer volume of those cattle coming in, and a lot of them coming in on the heavy side, is enough to do that. I would say that the market was probably steady to weak instead of just plain steady. But when you've got that many cattle, it's hard to choke that many cattle through buyers that are used to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 head. But and also you're seeing commercial domination in a Southern Plains market like that without very many farmer feeder types coming in there and really driving the market. But look at your 9-weight steers. 2,192 head of 9-weight steers averaging 934 at 119.86. Look at some heifers. 1,071 head of 7-weight heifers average 748 at 120.98. And 818 head of 8-weight heifers averaged 827 at 115.78. I'm going to talk about a consignment that comes to El Reno. You think a big market like that, they don't look at individual consignments. Bullshit. You got to have your small guys, your big guys, you got to have all of them. They treat them all like family there, and appreciate their business, and they're not too big to cater to their best consigners there. And look at this big consignment, the King cattle from Bennington, Oklahoma. Look at this. Over 1,300 head of yearling feeder cattle. They trusted OKC West to run them through their ring. They trusted their scales. They trusted those Cooper boys to auction them off. They trusted their buyer base, and they trusted their office to cut them a check, a kind of check you can buy ranches with, guys. But over 1,300 head of yearling steers there. Here, look at Cattle Market Central. This is the way we pull them out, guys. This is how it works. If you're not on Cattle Market Central and the National Beef Wire, this is kind of the information we get. They sold bang, 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 just big draft after big draft, and that's how they come through right there. 6 huge drafts of yearling feeder cattle, and these were all steers. 840 to 932 pounds there. There was 1,308 of them all together. They averaged 902 pounds at $123.84 on the weighted average price, based on 902 pound average on 1,308 head. That is a whale of a sale, and you got to give those guys credit for putting those cattle through the ring and putting them up for competition bidding. But that's a great deal. Not many other sales to talk about. I tell you what, there's just not many sales going. They're kind of on their wind down already. Some of them are on wheat harvest break. Some of them are already getting to winding down for the 4th of July. The videos are big, and they're coming around here in the next couple of weeks. But you look at one place, they did have a pretty good set of cattle there, or a couple of them, but I'm going to give you one. South Central Regional Stockyards in Vienna, Missouri. Dave Patton and Sons. I've told you before that Vienna gets those green, kind of short yearling cattle, top quality kind, when nobody else has them. It's the time of year when nobody else has them. They have them at South Central Regional Stockyards. 82 head, 627 pound steers, bring $165. And that's your feeder flash for Thursday.